Hello students, I'm again with a new topic of the history chapter, Pastoralists in the Modern World. Well, in the last class we have discussed the life of or cycle of movement of the nomadic pastoralist in mountains and even plateaus. So in today's topic, we will see that how the people or how the pastoralists they were moving in plain areas and even in desert. So about the plain areas, if we see in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, there were some dry central plateau covered with stone and grass. So in that particular that central plateau that was inhabited by cattle, goats, sheep herders. So in that plateau, so many cattle herders, goat and sheep herders were living. The Golas herded cattle. These were the different type of communities in that particular central plateau. So the Golas herded cattle. The Kurumas and Kurubas they reared sheep and goats, and they were selling woven blankets. So they were weaving the blankets and they were selling in that case. So they lived near the woods or the forested area, and even they were cultivating small patches of land also, and they were engaged in various type of or various varieties of petty traders or trades and took care of their herds also. So in that case, if we see, they were doing some sort of trades also, and as well as they were looking their herds, what they were rearing. So unlike the mountain pastoralist, it was not that cold and even snow covered area. So these areas were quite dry as already discussed. So again the movement of these pastoralists that was alternately in the monsoon season and in dry season. Mostly in dry season, these pastoralists they were moving to coastal areas. There they were finding some sort of pasture land. So when mostly rain it comes, that time they were living in that particular area, and when in there was a dry season, they were moving towards coastal area. Only buffaloes, that buffaloes animals they were liking swampy and wet conditions, and rest all other type of animals they were to shifted from wet area to dry area after that rain arrives in that particular area. So this was about the cycle of movement in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, or in you can say some sort of plain areas. Then other than that, Banjaras were another well-known group of graziers. So Banjaras also they were also coming in this category, and they were also having some sort of these animals, and even they were moving from one place to another place. Mostly these Banjaras were found in Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. So they were also moving in search of good pasture land for their cattle, and mostly they were moving long distance, selling low cattle and other goods in the villages, and even they were in exchange getting some sort of grains and fodder also. So this was the cycle of movement of Banjaras in particular states. Then comes in desert. In desert of Rajasthan, the particular community that was living, and the name of that particular community that was Raikas. So the rainfall in this region that was quite meager and uncertain. That we know that in the desert area, Rainfall is uncertain and that is quite low. So on cultivated land and harvested that fluctuate every year because of this rainfall that was uncertain and even quite less also. Then over the vast stretches, hardly any type of crop that was grown because of less rainfall and uncertain also. So Raikas, they combined the cultivation with the pastoralism. Most of the time, Raikas, they were sometimes doing some sort of cultivation if rainfall is coming at any level. And even they were doing the pastoralism also. So in that case, during the monsoon season, Raikas of Badmer, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur, Bikaner, they were staying in their home villages, where that pasture land was available at that time during the monsoon season. So whatever the rainfall that was coming in that particular area, so in that particular time or in the particular time of monsoon, Raikas of Badmer, Jaisalmer, Jodhpur and Bikaner, they were staying at their home villages because there some sort of pasture land was available. By October, when these grazing grounds were dry and exhausted, then they were moving in search of other pasture land and even water. So by the October or by the month of October, when these pastures that were dry and that were becoming dry and exhausted, that time they were moving in search of pasture and even water also. And they were returning again during the next monsoon season. So one more group of Raikas that was known as Maru Raikas. Maru, that is the meaning desert. Mostly they were living in the real deserted area and they were herding camels and so many other uh, animals like sheep and goats. So this was the movement of cycle in different type of area in desert of Rajasthan. Then comes next topic, the colonial rule and pastoral life. See, these were the different life we have discussed in India, in mountainous region, in plains, in plateaus, and even in desert. So, when Britishers or the colonial power they arrived in India, the life of pastoralists that was quite changed. And not only simply it was changed, it was dramatically changed. Their grazing grounds that were sunk, their movement that were also regulated, and the revenue they had to pay that was increased. Their agricultural stock that were also declined, and their trades and crafts, whatever they were doing, that were also adversely affected. So how these changes brought or that how these colonial rules change the life of these pastoralists. So there are variety of regions. One by one we will see. So first region that that colonial state they wanted to transform all the grazing land into cultivated farms. So this was the first region how the colonial rulers or colonial states they wanted to transport, they wanted to change all the grazing lands into cultivated farms. So land revenue that was the one of you can say main source of the income of Britishers or that colonial rulers. By expanding by expanding the cultivation, it could increase its revenue. That was the reason why they have transformed almost all the grazing land into cultivable land. So in that way, they wanted to produce some sort of crops like jute, cotton, wheat, and so many other agricultural products, which were in great demand in England, as well as with that items they were doing the trades also. So for the colonial officials, all the cultivated land appeared to be, for the colonial officials, all the uncultivated land that was they were considering unproductive. So they think that, and at that time they were thinking that this uncultivated land that is not even producing any sort of revenue or even any sort of agricultural produce. So that's why they thought that this grazing land should be converted into cultivable land. So that land they declared as a wasteland. Why? Because they want to convert it into cultivable land. So in the mid 19th century, wasteland rules were even enacted in various parts of our country. That means under this wasteland rule, any this type of land, if it is found anywhere, so that was to convert into cultivable land by Britishers. So by these rules, uncultivated land that were taken over by uh, Britishers and given to selected individuals. These individuals were granted various concession and encouraged to settle these lands. And some of them that what were they were doing? They were the heads of or headmen of the villages. They cleared that this type of areas and they were even cultivating different type of crops. So in most of the areas, land taken over by the Britishers, that was grazing land only. So that was regularly used by pastoralists. In this way, that grazing land that was declined or that was reduced all the way because of the colonial rules that were enacted. Second region that was again important, by mid 19th century, various forest act that were implemented in India. Through these acts, through these forest act, forests were divided into different categories. Many valuable trees like Devdar and Sal, these were declared the reserved forest. So in these reserved forest, no pastoralist was allowed to do anything or to cut any wood in the reserved forest. And then second category, some other forests were declared as, that is, protected forest. In these forests, somehow permission was granted to these pastoralists, but again with the restriction, severe restriction we can say. Then other third category that was made, that was the village forest. In that also the pastoralists were allowed with a prior permission only. Without permission, they were not allowed even to enter in the any of that forest. So in that way, what was the thinking of Britishers, that the grazing, even they were not allowing that animals also to graze in the any of the forest. So what they were thinking, that grazing, that is somehow destroying the sapling and young the plants which were growing in the forest. So that was the reason why they have not allowed even the animals to graze in different type of forest. So these forest act changed the lives of pastoralists all the way, no doubt in that. They were now prevented from entering many of the forests that earlier they were even moving freely, for especially taking the fodder and even cutting the wood from the forest. Even in some of the area they were not allowing any sort of entry. Their movement that was also regulated. In some of the cases they needed a permit for entry. All the pastoralists, they require some sort of pass to make any entry in the forest areas. Then timing also they have fixed. Britishers, they have fixed the timing also, and that was even along with the timing they were also fixed, and in the particular day how much time they can spend in these forests. So this was the condition with the pastoralists at that time, and this changed their life completely. So now and then, if they had to move in any of the forest, they require the pass, and by showing the pass only, they were allowed to enter in the forest. And if without any pass, if anyone found in these forests, they were punished all the way. Third reason that was British officials, they were very suspicious of nomadic people. Why? Because they considered that they are moving from one place to another place, and in that way they were doing some sort of trades also. And Britishers, they want that they should settle at a particular place permanently. Because of that, they require some sort of tax also from them. So in that way, they were moving from one place to another place in different seasons. So colonial government wanted to rule over a settled population. Britishers, they want that we should rule over a settled population. They wanted the rural people to live in the villages in a fixed places. So that was another reason why they want that these pastoralists should not move from one place to another place. So in such or by doing this, they want that population residing at a place that is quite easy to identify and even to control also. If population is quite living in a fixed place, so they thought, the Britishers thought that this is quite easy to identify them and to even control them. So those who were settled, that were seen as a peaceable and law abiding population. They were thinking that if people are living in a fixed place, they are quite maintaining the peace and they are mostly following the rules and regulation. But those who were nomadic, they were considered to be the criminal. So in 1871, the colonial government in India, they passed the Criminal Tribal Act. So by this act, many communities of craftsmen, traders and pastoralists, they were declared or they were classified as criminal tribes. They were stated to be criminal by nature and even birth. So once this act was in force, that many communities expected to live only in notified and in a particular area in the settled villages only. So they were not allowed to move without any permit. These type of criminal tribes were not allowed to move freely without a permit. So the village police, they were having a watch on them all the time. So this was another reason how the life was changed by the colonial rules. Then fourth one, to expand its revenue income, the colonial government looked for every possible source of taxation. So colonial people or colonial rulers, they always looked into their income, how to increase the income. So they were finding every possible source of taxation. So tax was imposed on land, on canal water, on salt, on trade goods, on even animals also. So these were the different taxes that imposed by colonial government in that particular time. So pastoralists had to pay tax on every animal they grazed on the pasture. So this was the condition with the pastoralist also. So in most pastoralist tracts in India, grazing tax was introduced in mid 19th century. So colonial government, they have implemented a grazing tax also during mid 19th century. The tax per head, the cattle went up rapidly, and even system of collection that was made increasingly effective also. So they have imposed the grazing tax, and how to collect, that was made very efficient. In the decades between 1850s and 1880s, the right to collect the tax, the right was given to collect the tax to some of the contractors, and these contractors, they tried to extract or these contractors, they were trying to take as high a tax they could to recover the money. That means they were the contractors were that collecting very high tax from pastoralists. So even in that they were taking their profit also from pastoralists along with the grazing tax. So by 1880s, the government began collecting the taxes directly from the pastoralists. Each of them that was given a pass, and to enter a grazing tract, they need to show the pass, and then only entry was possible. So in this way, this was also very effectively implemented by Britishers. So these were the different regions, how the life was changed because of colonial rules. Then again, this is another topic, that how did these changes affect the lives of pastoralists overall. So these measures that led to a serious shortage of pastures. No doubt, maximum pasture land or grazing land that was converted into cultivable land. When the grazing land that was taken over and turned it into cultivated fields, the available area of pasture land that was decreased. Actually, when the grazing land that was converted into the cultivable land, then the pasture land had to be decreased. Similarly, the reservation of forest, that meant shepherd and cattle herders, that could no longer freely pasture their cattle in the forest. When the reservation of forest that was started in India, because of that, also, all these pastoralists, they could no longer freely moving in the grazing land, and their animals could not graze very freely in that way. So in this way, their life was quite changed. As the pasture land disappeared under the plow, when the pasture land was converted into cultivable land, the existing animal stock that had to be feed on whatever grazing land was remained. When maximum that grazing land was converted into cultivable land, then whatever the grazing land was left, in that only all the animals they were grazing. Then this led to continuously intensive grazing on these pastures. So this was the another problem. Then remaining in the remaining pasture land, all the animals were grazing, and naturally that was the intensive grazing. Usually nomadic pastoralists, what they were doing, when in a particular grazing land that fodder is exhausted, then they were moving from that area to another area. But when the grazing land was just, you can say, limited, so they were not having any option to go from one place to another place. So in that case, their animals, they were grazing in that same pasture land all the time. So in that case, that you can say fodder or that grazing land, that was also deteriorated, or that pasture quality of pasture that was decreased. Deterioration means that was uh, quality was decreased. So in that case there was a again shortage of fodder, as well as that animals, that stock was also decreased, because many animals, they were dying because of scarcity of fodder, and even because of famine also. So in this way the pastoralist life that was quite changed because of these rules implemented by Britishers. So I think this is enough for today. That next we will see in the next class. By that time, God bless you. Thank you for joining. Bye.
लास्ट ट्रेन कर देंगे।